pick it up where we come in. Okay, so once upon a long time ago, wait a second. Okay, once upon a long time ago, Sigmund Freud was the first. He was the first one to come up with a comprehensive psychological theory. And that's why we talk about Freud. Was he a sexist? Not as much of a sexist as everybody else was. You have to remember, this is in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. Women didn't get the vote in the United States. When did women get the vote in the United States?
Is it 20? No.
1920. But this was going on all over the world. The English females didn't get the vote until 1924. So this is going on all over the world. Women were second-class citizens. Some places they were third-class citizens. So people didn't even look at it. They didn't care what was going on as far as women were concerned, and at least Freud cared, and he talked about it. So his theory has been identified as sexist, but the reality is that he was way ahead of most of the people he was talking with, the other theorists that were out there. So Freud is the first one. And because Freud's the first one, everybody came up with their theory in order to argue with Freud. And of course, Freud said it had to do with sex. So everybody else said, no, it had to do with something else. Jung, of course, Carl Jung, this is an older picture of Carl Jung. As I said before, Freud was in Vienna. And in Vienna, the only people doing psychology were Jewish doctors. So when we talk about Adler, we talk about Horney. When we talk about anybody in this Wednesday night group, we're talking about Jewish doctors, Jewish medical doctors. Jung was not. Jung was Swiss. He wasn't even Austrian. He was Swiss. And his father was a Swiss Reformed minister. And so he was very Christian. It was a Christian organization, of course. So he was raised as a Christian. And he came down to Vienna. He was a doctor as well. He came down to Vienna to study with Freud, and he was a psychologist in Vienna, just like Adler and just like Freud was. And he came up with his own theory. Why did he come up with this theory? Well, this looks awfully close to following the Bible, right? I mean, it really does. So he argued with Freud. And when he argued with Freud, he actually, Freud selected Jung as the next guy that was going to take over the Wednesday night group. Freud was getting older, and he was looking for somebody else to do it. And he selected Carl Jung to be the next guy in charge, despite the fact he wasn't Jewish. He was Swiss Reformed Church. Okay. And I told you last time, it's not that funny, but he was, of course, the Nazis didn't like the Jews, and they tried to exterminate all the Jews. Carl Jung, of course, was not Jewish. He was Swiss Reformed Church. So he actually joined the Nazis, and he wrote profiles on all these other individuals, and he wrote positive Nazi texts during World War II. As it turned out, he was sending all of this to the Allies, and he was also writing profiles on the Nazi leadership. So he was a double agent during the war, despite the fact he had problems with Freud. Freud and Jung broke. Jung was supposed to take over the Wednesday night group. It didn't happen, and the reason it didn't happen was because into the picture comes Karen Horney. This is what Karen Horney looked like as a teenager. As you can see, she was fairly attractive. This is her daughter, Bridget. They say that Bridget was the spitting image of Karen when she was younger. Karen when she was older, I guess. Okay. Bridget was an actress, was a German actress. She was also Jewish, so she had to leave Germany during World War II. But Karen Horney was very attractive. And Freud told everybody to leave her alone. Guess what happened next?
He married her?
I'm sorry?
He married her?
Who, Freud?
No.
No. Freud was already married, had 6 kids. Guess what happened next? He told everybody to leave her alone. She was strikingly attractive. And guess what happened? Guess what Carl Jung did? Yes, of course he did. He had an affair with her. Of course he did. She was a very, very attractive woman. And of course that really upset Freud because he told everybody, he told the whole Wednesday night group to leave her alone. She was brilliant. She was a prodigy. And here Carl Jung is messing with her. So at that point, Freud kicked Jung out. And Jung wrote him a letter. And it was kind of interesting. It's kind of an interesting letter because he said things like, you know, you're the one that I really admire. You're the one I really love. I know that sounds like he had a gay crush on Freud, but the reality was, he said, I was just trying to impress you. I wanted to show you that I could do it. And that's the reason he had an affair with Karen Horne, as odd as that seems. And you can read the letter. It's really kind of fascinating. It sounds it sounds kind of like he's homosexual, but he never really was, I don't think. Anyway, I wanted to show you what Karen Horne and I looked like. This is the only picture I could find of her as a young girl, but as you can see, even as a child, she was a very attractive woman, and her daughter, of course, was strikingly attractive. Anyway, so he had an affair with Karen Horne, and of course, from that he got in trouble with Freud. But Jung wasn't the only one that had trouble with Freud. Alfred Adler, as you can see, a very attractive man. I'm kidding. He's kind of a goofy-looking guy. Alfred Adler was kind of an interesting guy because when he was 3 years old, his baby brother was sleeping beside him and he died during the night. I know. And so he woke up with this baby that was dead. I mean, it was cold. How horrible that is. Anyway, he had lots of interesting problems. He had rickets when he was a child. He had one leg that was shorter than the other. So when he was looking at Freud's theories, one of the things he said was, well, it's not sex. It's the fact that we feel inferior. That forces us to try harder. So as children, of course, we're only this tall, and the adults are this tall. So in order to become better, we need to develop an inferiority complex. And from that inferiority complex, it makes us try even harder. And that was Adler. So his whole theory was based on an inferiority complex. Of course, we have... Of course, we have Adler walking around with this big shoe on one foot, and he's hobbling around. Little short fella, he's about 5'4". Freud was much taller. Well, he's 5'8". What am I saying? Much taller. Okay. Anyway, so we've got Alfred Adler. If you saw Freud when he was younger, he was a relatively attractive man. And here's Adler, and he's kind of homely, of course. And inferiority complex. So he talked about inferiority complex as the most important aspect of, that's our driving force. It wasn't sex. It wasn't our libido. It wasn't the Bible. It wasn't all of those archetypes that Jung talked about. It was the fact that we had an inferiority complex. But we're not done yet. We have other psychodynamic theorists. The next psychodynamic theorist we're going to talk about is Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson was another attractive man. He didn't have to worry about being ugly. But he was Jewish, and he was born into a family of Jewish people. And he didn't look anything like Mom, and he didn't look anything like Dad. And then Mom got remarried. He didn't look anything like his stepdad because he had blonde hair and blue eyes. Jewish people don't have blonde hair and blue eyes. They have brown hair. They have black hair. They have dark eyes. And he didn't look anything like him. They're relatively swarthy complected. In other words, they have a darker complexion. They have curly hair. And he had relatively straight hair. And it was blonde. He looked German. And for that reason, in his Jewish community, when he went to Shula, when he went to school, the Jewish school to learn his bar mitzvah and whatnot, he was treated very poorly by the other Jewish kids. because he looked different. Now you would think that he would be passing, so he could just wander off into the German kids and the non-Jewish kids, and he'd be okay. But he couldn't because he was Jewish. So this is a kid that's rejected by like everybody and their cousin, literally everybody and their cousin. So he grew up all by himself. So his theory was based on society and what society was doing to you. His was a psychosocial theory, Erik Erikson. So he was always looking for a social crisis that was taking place. Because in his life, everything was a social crisis. Rejected by everybody. Nobody liked him. And then when he was 16 years old, his mom told him, hey, guess what? The guy that I was married to when you were born is not your father. I became impregnated by a Danish sea captain. So at 16, he drops out of school, starts wandering around to Europe looking for his father. Some Danish sea captain with blue eyes and blonde hair. Like all the Danish sea captains don't have blonde hair and blue eyes, as strange as that may seem. Eventually he ended up in, he learned to teach at Montessori school, the original Montessori school, down in Italy, and then he went up to Vienna, Austria, and started working with Anna and Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud dealt with adults. Anna Freud was a child psychologist, and Erikson started working with Anna. And in 1940, Hitler took over in 1932. By the end of the 1930s, the war had started, the Anschluss had taken place, they had invaded Czechoslovakia, they were starting to put Jewish people in concentration camps. They made them wear yellow stars of David on their clothes to identify them as Jewish, and at that point Freud left. He left to Europe, and he went to England. And Erikson got on a boat and went to the United States. He came to the United States. But his name wasn't Erik Erikson. I'm trying to think what it was. It was Erich Homburger. That's what it was. It was Erich Homburger. And that was the name of either his father, the man that his mother was married to, or his stepfather. I can't remember which one it was. Anyway, his name was Homburger. And he decided that since he was reinventing himself, that he would name himself Erik, son of myself. Erik Erikson. And that's where he came up with the name Erik Erikson. He came up with it all by himself. Never graduated from high school. Taught at a Montessori school. Worked with kids with Anna and Sigmund Freud. Had 3 job offers. One from Stanford, one from Yale, and one from Harvard. And eventually he would teach at all 3 places, despite the fact he never graduated from high school. I know, that's not fair, is it? It's just not fair. Anyway, so his whole theory was psychosocial theory, because he had gone through a lot of social upheaval during his life. So Adler is a little short guy with one leg shorter than the other, and his concept is an inferiority complex. If we look at Karen Horne, it's really kind of fascinating. She's just about the only female psychologist that you'll read about, but of course it's not in your this textbook. You'll have to read about it in personality theories if we ever teach that class. And of course, who else do we have? Erikson was went through a lot of social crises. So we have a lot of different theories, and we're going to talk about more theories. More people arguing with Sigmund Freud. Okay, in the United States, we don't care about sex, we don't care about society, we don't care about inferiority complexes. What do we care about? Money. Of course we care about money. That's the most important thing. So it's productivity. So when we were looking at the psychological aspect of people, we didn't care about all this namby-pamby mental stuff. We didn't care about that. We didn't care about curing people. What we cared about was saving money, making more money. So we came up with the concept of behaviorism. It actually started in Russia with Pavlov. But of course, the American psychologists picked it up. Not Henry James, William James, his brother. William James was at Harvard, and of course he was looking at productivity. And then John B. Watson picked it up. And they're the ones that came up with this concept of behaviorism. Pavlov they took Pavlov's idea and ran with it. How in the world can we make more money? How can we increase our productivity? And that's where behaviorism came from. Behaviorism is an approach to understanding behavior that emphasizes the relationship between observable behavior. We don't care what's going on in your head. We just want to see it. We want you to make more parts. The relationship between observable behavior and specifiable environmental events or stimuli. How can we increase our productivity? That's what behaviorism is all about. We need to get you to do what we want you to do. So it's observable behavior. We don't care what's going on in the head. We only care what's going on as far as your activity is concerned. We want to stop people from robbing other people. How do we do that? We can condition people not to do that kind of stuff. An underlying assumption is that the principles of conditioning could explain all behavior, both normal and abnormal. Therefore, abnormal behavior has to do with a conditioned response. So if we can figure out what that conditioned response is, we can change it. And we can increase the productivity. Now that guy's not robbing the store, and we don't have to worry about shoplifting anymore. Because we've conditioned it out of it. By golly, and it works, or not. There are two schools of behaviorism. It started out with classical conditioning, or Pavlovian conditioning. But then in the 1920s, actually in the 1930s, B.F. Skinner came up with a way that we could condition people not using classical conditioning. And we're going to talk about the difference between the two in just a second. The concept of classical conditioning was developed at the turn of the 20th century by Ivan Pavlov, of course. He was a gastroenterologist from Russia. He's the one that came up with the concept, and then J.B. Watson picked it up, and he was at Johns Hopkins University, and he ran with it. But he didn't stay a psychologist for very long. He wrote a lot of things, he talked about a lot of things. He came up with this whole pattern of conditioning, but John B. Watson got into trouble. He was messing around with somebody's wife, and he got fired from Johns Hopkins. Don't worry, he didn't starve to death. I know you guys were all worried about John B. Watson. He went into advertising. Oh, good. And you guys just watched, if you watched the Super Bowl last night, watched all the commercials on television, all that stuff, all those actors and actresses, all those famous people, all of those ways of putting commercials together, John B. Watson came up with it. He's trying to condition you to buy his product. And he's the one that came up with that whole concept. So whatever you saw last night on television, I don't know. I didn't watch. I just watched the end of the game. Pretty good end of the game. When I turned it on just as Brady was about to score the last touchdown they scored, then the Eagles came back and scored a touchdown, and then there was like a minute and a half left. I just watched the end of the game. What's the use of watching the rest of the game? All you have to do is watch the last 2 or 3 minutes, and you see everything. Anyway, so I didn't really see any commercials. Did anybody see the halftime show? Anybody watch the game? No? Didn't see the halftime show? Because they were saying Justin Timberlake was just fabulous. I don't know. No idea. I don't know. Maybe I'll ask my daughter. She watches all that stuff. Okay. The idea behind behaviorism is that through training or conditioning, a therapist can teach a client to repair any appropriate behavior. And the behavior, of course, we don't really care about what's going on in your head, like I said before. We just want you not to do that again. So all we're trying to do is cure your behavior. We don't care what's going on in your head. Behavior can be changed by watching someone else perform the correct behavior, and this is known as modeling. So if you watched the game last night, I don't know, Gronsky, that great big, he must be 7 feet tall, jeez. And he's huge. He catches the ball, then he just knocks everybody out of the way. He's huge. Gronsky, is that his name? The Gronk? I don't know. Anyway, modeling behavior. You just watch somebody do something and you pick it up from watching them do the right thing. Okay. Classical conditioning is defined as a conditioned response to a neutral stimulus. After having been paired repeatedly with an unconditioned stimulus, this response is involuntary, of course. Okay, so this is what's going on. We'll take a dog. Every time you give the dog food, the dog will salivate. Okay. The food is an unconditioned stimulus, and the response is an unconditioned response. Salivates because you've given them food. So what Pavlov decided to do, he decided to tie a neutral stimulus with the unconditioned stimulus. So every time he fed the dog, he would ring a bell. So when he brought the food, the dog would salivate, and then he would ring the bell. Now all of a sudden, the dog is salivating to the bell, even though it shouldn't make them salivate. The bell has nothing to do with salivation, except he has conditioned that dog to salivate when the bell is rung, because the dog thinks he's going to be fed. And that's classical conditioning in a nutshell. As interesting and fascinating as that is. So if we can take anything that's unconditioned, any stimulus that is unconditioned, and we can tie it to just about anything. And that's how they train elephants to play soccer, and raccoons to play basketball, and all the rest of that stuff. You can train anybody to do just about anything. We can train dogs, we can train horses, we can train them to do just about anything. And what we're doing is we're tying a select response to an unconditioned stimulus. Or we're tying a conditioned stimulus to a conditioned stimulus. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. So the bell and the food are stimuli. Now they suddenly are stimuli. One is a conditioned stimuli, the other is an unconditioned stimuli. Okay. And the saliva is the conditioned and unconditioned response. Okay? That's classical conditioning in a nutshell. Okay, the rest of this. He did win the Nobel Prize in 1904 for physiology because he was looking at digestion. And of course he was working with dogs, and that's the reason he worked, that's the reason we talk about dogs and bells. Unconditioned response is the response that occurs naturally. That's the natural salivation, of course, of the dog. The unconditioned stimulus is it's the stimulus that naturally evokes the response. You bring in food, the dog salivates. The conditioned stimulus, of course, is the bell. So now we've tied the bell to the food. And the conditioned response is the salivation from the tongue, from the bell. Okay. There you go. And this is a Pavlovian joke. You don't have to think it's funny if you don't want to. I know. Wow, look at this. I can make him smile and write it as a book. Okay. Yeah, see, so the dog and animals will condition us. My cat has conditioned me to get up in the morning and feed her. And if I don't feed her, she knocks something off my dresser. And then if she knocks something off my dresser, then the dog gets it and chews it up. So I have to get up in order to save whatever she's knocked on the floor. Okay. So when she comes into my room, I get up and I feed the cat to keep her from knocking something on the floor. She's conditioned me to get up and feed her. And you think she doesn't know what she's doing, but she knows exactly what she's doing. She's a pain. What did she knock off this morning? Oh, I've got a basket for all my change. It's a really nice basket, weave basket. And she knocked it off this morning, and the dog got a hold of it and chewed it up, but it's not completely. So now it's a basket. Damn cat. I don't know what to do. She's a pain in the ass. Oh, did I say ass? I can't see. She's really a pain. That damn cat. You know, the crazy thing is, I saved her from a pack of dogs, and she was pregnant, and she had kittens. When I saved her, I should have let him eat her. That's what I should have done. Well, that's on the tape too. Because now she's had those kittens. The kittens are up in Iowa in the barn, and she's here with me. And you can't pet her. You pet her twice, and she bites you. Why do I even have this? It must be classical conditioning. There must be something wrong with you. Another type of behavioral conditioning is called operant conditioning. So that's Pavlov, that's Watson. They're tying unconditioned stimuli to unconditioned responses and creating a conditioned stimuli and a conditioned response. That's Pavlov and Watson. But along comes Skinner, and Skinner decides that he doesn't need unconditioned stimuli. Whereas in classical conditioning, the scientist is tying wanted responses to an automatic response, like ringing the bell and salivation. In operant conditioning, the subject is responding in the wanted way because the scientist is rewarding the new behavior. So they're giving them something. They're rewarding them. They're giving them a reward. And by doing this, they make them do the same thing over and over and over and over again. And this is known as operant conditioning. It isn't classical conditioning because they're not taking an unconditioned stimulus and creating a conditioned response. It's operant conditioning. Thus, operant conditioning is in operant conditioning, a scientist or a trainer can train anyone to do practically anything. And this is actually how they train animals, is by rewarding them. What kind of reward do they get? I don't know, pats on the head, food, whatever.
So this is with the unconditioned or conditioned?
It's operant conditioning. So there is no unconditioned stimulus and unconditioned response. I know, isn't that
That's
bizarre?
the classical. Okay.
Yeah, with the operant, there's none of.
Yeah, they can tie anything together. He trained pigeons to guide bombs during World War II. Yeah. So they would hit a disc, and they would change the direction that the bomb was flying, so that it would hit the target. He was able to do that, and that's where he came up with this whole thing. So they're not tying anything to anything. They're tying reward or punishment, as strange as that is. In operant conditioning, reinforcement is a consequence that strengthens or increases the likelihood that the response will be repeated. Primary reinforcers are in events, usually biological in nature, which almost always provide reinforcement. Food. Unfortunately, one of them is sex, and I know I'm not supposed to talk about sex, but the reality is you can use that as a reinforcement. Punishment is a consequence that weakens or decreases the likelihood that a response will be repeated. So if you punish something, you're trying to weaken a response. You're trying to keep them from doing it. That's why you spank your child every time your child does something, drinks the paint or whatever. You have to spank them. Right? You're trying to weaken that response. You don't want them to do it anymore. Or run out in the road. You don't want them to run out in the road. Okay. Some places, they'll run right over that kid. Okay. So we can't let them run out in the road. So if he runs out in the road, you've got to punish him somehow. Yell at him, shake your finger, maybe even spank them. Right? Because you don't want, that's hard to hit the kid. Okay. And that's punishment. Punishers are types of consequences that weaken or suppress the behaviors that produce them. So a punishment is something negative. With me, it would be getting a speeding ticket. That's a punisher. That bothers me. I don't want to be stopped by the police. I don't like that light. And they shine the bright light in your car so that they can see if you're grabbing a gun or whatever. Ugh, I hate that. I don't have a gun, so I don't know. Consequences can be further organized as to whether the behavioral contingency involves a presentation or removal of something. Positive reinforcement is where a stimulus is added as the consequence of behavior. Negative reinforcement is where a stimulus is removed as a consequence of a behavior. So if, well, in this case, I don't know.
These were confusing.
This is so confusing.
Yeah.
I know.
The way
It drives you crazy. Discriminative stimulus serves as a signal that a certain response will lead to a reinforcer or a punisher. The organism learns to not only make a response, but to only make it under certain circumstances. Stop the car in the presence of a red light in a traffic signal. That makes sense. Discriminative stimulus. Continue forward in the presence of a green light. Discriminative stimulus. Discriminative stimuli serve to guide our actions. They tell us when to do something. When I was in the airport. Wait a minute, did something happen? No, nothing happened in the airport. There was a family, and they had like 5 kids. And and they were like stair steps. I mean, they must have had them every year. But there was one little girl, and she started to run down the concourse. The door was open, they were loading, they had finished loading, and this little girl decided she'd take off down the concourse. You know, that's a federal crime. You can't do that. So the clerk was standing there, and she screamed at the lady to come and get her kid. Otherwise, we'll arrest you and throw your whole family in jail. You know, that kind of thing. Discriminative stimuli. Okay. If I had done it, they would have. Yeah. I'd be on the ground, and they'd have broken my left arm or something. But the kid, of course, was able to get away with it. Abnormal behavior is shaped because it produces reinforcing consequences. Okay. A guy that robs people, a guy that robs stores, a guy that shoplifts. This individual does it over and over again and doesn't get caught. So it's reinforcing him. It's the money is reinforcing him. So this is abnormal behavior. This is criminal behavior. But since they're not getting caught, it is actually reinforcing for him to do this. And sometimes when we're talking about chronic criminals, this is what has happened. They started out as relatively young. They were able to get things because they are selling drugs or whatever. Because they're selling things, they're getting things out of criminal behavior, so they continue it. And of course, they're going to continue it the rest of their lives, potentially because no one has ever told them no. They've never been caught. Of course, drug dealers, we see the same thing. Nobody's ever stopped them. And they make a lot of money. And everybody likes them because they've got a lot of money. There you go. Abnormal behavior should be subject to unlearning if the setting conditions and consequences are appropriately changed. The contingencies that maintain a behavior can be shown through the use of a reversal design. One of the things that we can do, one of the things that we have seen, sometimes people are reinforced for their negative behavior. Borderline personality disorder, for example. There's a song about a lady that she breaks up with her boyfriend. She thinks he's out with somebody else, so she takes a knife and she carves her name into his car, and she takes a baseball bat and breaks his... I know, it's a great song. However, this is not only criminal behavior, but it's also borderline personality disorder to have this type of behavior. So is she trying to train people to be borderline? Is that what it's... That's abnormal behavior, but it has positive consequences. Because he's not going to cheat next time. He's going to think before he cheats next time. Because her name's carved in his leather seats, right? Okay. And you probably all love that song. This song came out when I was up in Montana, and they said, this is a Montana woman, but that's they really kick ass, that kind of thing. Don't ever mess with a Montana woman. I never messed with a Montana woman anyway, but, and I've never had my seats curved up. What, she punctured all 4 of his tires? She broke out all of his headlights with a baseball bat? Don't you remember this song? It was Carrie Underwood. Carrie Underwood. Skinny, skinny, skinny blonde lady. Okay. And she's destroying this guy's car. Well, that's abnormal behavior. But of course, well, anyway, it's a song. I'm sure she never actually did that in real life. Reversal design is an experimental design in which reinforcement contingencies are changed, reinstated, and changed again, attempting to demonstrate the contingencies that maintain a behavior. So there are a lot of individuals that don't believe in abnormal mental illness. They believe that they've been conditioned incorrectly. And all we need to do is reverse the process. Somebody's an alcoholic. What do we have to do? We have to reverse the process. We have to change the contingencies. We've got to change the reason that they go out and drink. We have to change their lifestyle. If we can change their lifestyle, potentially we can change their abnormal behavior, and they won't drink anymore to excess. And of course, the reality is that we have to keep them from drinking at all. We're talking about, what are we talking about? Oh, we're talking about operant conditioning. Systematic desensitization is a conditioning method whereby an unwanted behavior is changed by incrementally introducing the unwanted stimulus while controlling the emotional response through relaxation therapy. Systematic desensitization, a huge thing about systematic desensitization, this has to do with phobias. So you're afraid of something. How do we get you from, keep you from being afraid of that anymore? Systematic desensitization. We train you to relax when you come in contact with a negative stimulus. And because you're relaxed, you're more likely to come in contact with it. The next time you actually do come in contact with it, a big hairy spider, because we've conditioned you to relax when you come in contact with the stimulus, you're able to come in contact with that stimulus. Systematic desensitization usually has to do with phobias. Fear of flying, fear of riding in elevators.
Public speaking.
Public speaking. That works. Yeah. Anything that you're afraid of, we can train you to be able to handle it through systematic desensitization. We bring you closer, incrementally we bring you closer and closer and closer to the stimulus, the fearful stimulus. I worked with a guy, actually he was down at Arizona State. He was at Arizona State. And he was working with the Diamondbacks. And these guys could play baseball, and they could go out there and they could hit against Randy Johnson or something. But, this fireball pitcher, but they couldn't tee off playing golf because it scared them too much. They could play all the baseball in the world against all the best baseball players in the world. It didn't bother them at all. But they couldn't go out and tee off with, 150 people watching. It scared him. So one of the things he would do, he would use systematic desensitization to get them closer and closer and closer to being able to tee off. Because what you need to do, one of the things that happens to you when you're scared, if you're playing a sport, you're either swinging your golf club or you're swinging your baseball bat. The tighter you hold the baseball bat, the worse you're going to get because all your muscles tighten up and now you can't swing the bat. Well, the same thing happens with golf. So what he had to do, he had to get them to relax when they had a golf club in their hand as compared to a baseball bat in their hand. Anyway, systematic desensitization. And the way he did it was he would put electrodes on their scalp so that he could detect whether they're putting off delta waves or alpha waves. If you're putting off alpha waves, it means that you're relaxed. So what he tried to do, he tried to get them to play golf with this thing on their heads so that then he could detect whether they were putting off alpha waves or beta waves. I'm sorry, delta waves. Beta waves, actually, not delta waves. Delta waves is asleep, so beta waves is what I'm talking about. Okay. The cognitive model is based on the idea that abnormal or dysfunctional behavior is caused by incorrect thought or emotional processes. These are the cognitive processes. There were two pioneers, and we're not really going to talk about them very much, but the two pioneers were Beck. He came up with cognitive therapy, and Alfred Ellis, he came up with rational emotive therapy. Interesting fellas, these two guys. One was from Pittsburgh, Ellis is from Pittsburgh, and Beck is from Rhode Island. And if you've ever heard Beck speak, he has since died. I think he died a couple of years ago. But Beck had such a strong Rhode Island accent, you couldn't understand a word the guy said. It was like he was speaking a foreign language. Ellis, on the other hand, had a really nasal voice. So he was really, two really interesting people. One you couldn't understand at all, and the other guy, every time he spoke, you cringed because everything went through his nose. He talked right through his nose. Alfred Ellis, really interesting guy. Alfred Ellis made millions and millions of dollars off of his therapy. And one of the reasons is because if you came in to work with Ellis, Ellis would sell you volumes of his books. And so that's how he made all of his money, by selling you his books. These two approaches are based on the same premise, that people become dysfunctional through assumptions and attitudes that are inaccurate. One of the things that happened to me last weekend, I was inducted into the Athletic Hall of Fame for my high school. It's really kind of fascinating because as I'm talking to these people, there's 12 people that are being inducted into the Hall of Fame. As I'm talking to these people, most of them are saying, well, I didn't deserve it. I didn't deserve it. Dave is the one that deserved it. I don't know. Compared to Dave, I shouldn't have been in the Hall of Fame. And I'm thinking, the reason you're in the Hall of Fame is because you did something amazing athletically. That's why you're in the Hall of Fame. You're not in the Hall of Fame because it was a popularity contest. You're thinking about this completely incorrectly. They were thinking because Dave was a singular athlete that he deserved to be in the Hall of Fame. And the rest of us were there because of team activity. We were on a team that won this or that or the other. I was on a team that has held a record for 50 years. And that's a long time. I don't know. Putting 4 guys together that can run that fast is kind of amazing. If it's just blind luck pretty much. However, it's still athletic ability. So their attitudes were completely inaccurate. These guys are going, I don't deserve it, I don't deserve it. The reality is we all deserve it. Because we were on teams that were very, very successful. And sometimes we were the very first teams that did something. It was part of an illogical thinking process. Who did they want? Well, of course, we weren't the premier studs in our class. We weren't the best athletes in our class. But it turned out that we were able to put together a team that set a record that has never been broken. It's still there. It could be there for the rest of the school's history. No, I can't. All records are made to be broken. But the idea is that it's assumptions and attitudes that are inaccurate. And people have these all the time. I'm not pretty. I'm not smart. People won't go to college because they think they're not smart enough to go to college. When I was in high school, I was 20th in the class. Well, this is a high school class. My goodness, I must be dumb as dirt. There's only 72 of us, and I was number 20. I must be stupid. No. There were 18 geniuses in the class. 18 geniuses. So 20 is not bad when you're talking about 18 really, really super smart people. But there were a lot of individuals that didn't go to college because competing against everybody else in the class was really hard. Yeah. You're almost always second or third or fourth or fifth or sixth. Or 18th or 19th or 20th. It really didn't make any difference. But there were a lot of individuals with inaccurate ideas because they didn't realize how smart they were. Because they were comparing themselves to all of these geniuses. We all did. Everybody in the class did. And it was part of illogical thinking process. And there are a lot of illogical thoughts that you can have. I'm not pretty, I'm not smart, I'm too short, I'm too tall. What if, when we lined up for the race that set the record, there were 4 of us, and I was the tallest guy on the team. Well, it's a relay team, so there's 4 of them. But I was the tallest guy on the team. Well, going up against somebody that's 6'4", 6'5", that's not the easiest thing in the world. My stride is just that long, and their stride is like longer. So what do I have to do to outrun them? I have to move my legs faster, I guess. But, I mean, what if I told myself, well, I can't beat these guys? Like, how can I possibly win? I'm too short. Short people can't run fast. I've heard the song. It's about short people have no reason to live. I don't know if you've heard it. Hopefully you've never heard that song. Anyway, that's illogical thinking. There's no reason why I can't run as fast as they do. And that's exactly what happened. I ran very, very fast. And when I was in college, I ran against a world record holder one time. My God, he beat me so bad. It was so bad. But he was shorter than me. I know. Ivory Crockett was the guy's name. Look him up. He's went to Southern Illinois University. It's just amazing. To cognitive therapists, abnormal behaviors occurs because people maintain illogical ideas upon which they fixate. We fixate on these things. So here we are. We're this group of 4 midgets, and we're running against people that are normal heighted people. 6'4", 6'5", 6 feet tall. And these guys are really good, really fast. But we beat them. How in the world did we ever do it? We hypnotized ourselves and we didn't think about it. Therapy involves pointing out these illogical thoughts and forming new, more functional ways of thinking. And that's what you do. You try to change the way these people see things. Change the way that they operate. One of the illogical thoughts you can have is that everybody has to love me. Nobody can hate me. Well, what's the probability of that happening? Now here's the bizarre thing. You can control my behavior. If I feel like that everybody has to love me, you can control my behavior just by disliking me. And I'll do anything to get you to like me. Oh, wait a minute. Now that is pathological, isn't it? All of a sudden you're controlling my behavior. Not only are you controlling my behavior, but you don't even like me. So I'm going to do anything to get you to like me, including potentially marry you, whoever you may happen to be. I know. Now what a negative situation is that? You've got one person that is controlling the other person just by treating them poorly. I know. We see this all the time. Cognitive therapy. I know, it's really kind of bizarre. So what we have to do is we have to change your mind. Did I tell you the story about the young girl? Her husband was just the worst guy in the whole wide world. He's a drug dealer. He prostituted her out. She was married to this guy, and she came in with him. She was gorgeous. She was just so attractive. And she let this guy manipulate her all over the place. Why? Because her father had treated her that way when she was a child. So she thought that that was the proper way to be treated. So she married this guy who did horrible, horrible things to her, and she had the self-esteem of a mouse, of a gnat. He could get her, he could manipulate her into doing anything. He didn't even like her. So what did we do with her? Well, he went off to prison because he was doing something he shouldn't have been doing, not just prostituting her out. And while he was in prison, she came to, not me, it was really kind of fascinating. She came to a colleague of mine, and he started working with her, but he couldn't work with her because she was able to manipulate men with her sexuality. She would try to seduce men, and that's how she controlled them. Not her husband, of course, but other men. And so he had to allow his wife to do therapy with her. And eventually she convinced herself that she was attractive, and there was a lot more to her than just her sexuality. It was really kind of a fascinating situation. And she'd never had a female friend before. she was too pretty. Women didn't want to be friends with her. Nobody wanted to stand up right beside her because they suffered, in comparison. So nobody wanted to be her friend. She started wearing, she stopped wearing as much makeup and she started wearing glasses. I know, as odd as that seems. And that changed everything. Then she went to college. By the time the guy got out of prison, she divorced him. And now she's getting her master's degree in therapy, in counseling. As interesting. Last time I heard about her, she was getting her master's degree in counseling. Interesting stuff. Okay. Therapy involves pointing out the illogical thoughts. The therapist guides the client and challenges the negative thoughts, biased interpretations and errors in logic that fill their thinking, maintaining new, more positive ways of living their daily lives. And we do this all the time. Everybody does this. I may even be doing this, despite the fact that I read over this stuff all the time. We're illogical. We don't think. We have negative ideas about ourselves that we shouldn't have. I can't do this. If you ever use the word can't, then you probably do this. Well, there's one thing I can't do, and that's fix a car. I can change oil, and that's about it. I'm so bad at that. Okay, anyway. I should never try to fix my own car. Other than that, we all do this all the time. So if you have this problem, if you have something negative that you tell yourself all the time, try to talk yourself out of it, because that's what cognitive therapy is all about. And that's Alfred Ellis. He was really good at this. Alfred Ellis and Aaron Beck were used the same type of therapy, but Alfred Ellis would get in your face and cheek his finger. You're wrong. You're saying things wrong. And Beck would say, well, why do you have those ideas? That's Aaron Beck. But Alfred Ellis, he could cure you really fast just by telling you what you were thinking incorrectly. But he yelled at you and he shook his finger at you and all kinds of stuff. Anyway, okay. That's cognitive therapy, which is kind of cool if you think about it, because you can really fix people that way. The humanistic existential model feels that humans are born with a natural tendency to be friendly, cooperative, and constructive. How many of us are friendly, cooperative, and constructive? Not very many of us. Why? Why aren't we friendly, cooperative, and constructive? What's wrong with us? Why aren't we friendlier? Why are we only friendly to certain people? Somebody went to another high school, you were not very friendly with those people. Why? What's wrong with us? Why don't we like the Russians? What's wrong with the Russians?
It's just like the survival mechanism, like a protective factor.
Why don't they like us back? What's wrong with us? So it's a survival thing. So we have to pick and choose who we're going to be nice to. Is that the way it works?
Well, I guess it's also contextual too.
Right. Society tells us who to be nice to. Mm-hmm. They tell us who our enemies are, right? Is that the way it works?
The media does.
Does it?
Society.
What do you guys call your tribal group? What is this group? What are you guys? Danette? 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 Okay. What does that mean? I don't think that's what it means. Doesn't it mean children of the holy people? Isn't that what it means? What about?
It means male.
Huh?
Male. Danette.
Danette means male?
Danette is kind of like a holy person.
Holy person.
Yeah.
Okay.
Danette.
All right. So what if
It's actually Nuhoka Danette.
and that means
That's the child of the holy person.
child of the holy
But
person?
when you just say Danette, it's kind of, it means two things, like male.
Okay.
Danette.
So what about those guys that live east of here? I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong direction. East of here.
Not Danette.
They're not.
Not Danette. Enemy now.
So these guys, I don't know where they're from. Anyway, they call themselves a numina. Do you know those people?
Are you talking about the Athabascan group now? or-
No, I'm talking about these guys are from Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, Eastern Colorado, Phenomena. You guys know those people? Comanches. Yeah, Comanches, that's the Ute word. That means enemy. Well, they call themselves the Numina. What does Numina mean? Guess what Numina means?
The people.
The people, exactly. It means the people. I know. Okay, so we got all these different groups, and they all call themselves the Nez Perce. They call themselves the. What do they call themselves, Johnny? You know. The Nez Perce? You've been up there. You know what those guys call themselves. They call themselves the Nimepu. Guess what that means? I know. It means the people. Wait a minute. Okay. Okay. So yeah, society tells us who to be friends with and who to be enemies with. It's the Utes that called the Comanche the Comanche. The Comanche called themselves the Numina, but the Utes were their enemies, so they called themselves the people that kill us all the time, which is Comanche. Okay. So yeah, we do decide who our enemies are going to be. We do decide who the good guys and the bad guys are. Don't we? We do. And society tells us who the good people are and who the bad people are. Right? It's all on tape. Am I in trouble or what? Okay, so. Some people we're friendly to and some people we aren't friendly to. Some people in the United States don't like African Americans. Of course, African Americans like themselves. That would be silly not to like yourself. Some people don't like Hispanics, people that are Mexican Americans. For no reason whatsoever, or maybe there is a reason. I don't know. Society tells us who we can be friendly with and who we can't be friendly with. But the reality is that we strive for individuality. So we're always fighting against society. We're always trying to tell society they don't know what the hell they're talking about. So we try to be different. We strive to be friendly, cooperative, and constructive. But the reality is society won't let us sometimes, especially if you've joined the military. Didn't they tell you who your enemy was? Didn't they tell you who to shoot at? They told me who to shoot at. In one of the groups, they told me, just in case the war started, that the Russians were our enemies. I was in Germany when what did they do? They invaded Afghanistan in 1980. They invaded Afghanistan. And we thought that they were going to roll right through East Germany and right into West Germany. That's where I was stationed. It was a mess. Could have been ugly. Could have been really ugly. So they were telling us that the Russians were the bad guys. Some of the pictures that they showed of the Russians, my goodness gracious, you would have thought that they were monsters, eating babies and whatnot. So society tells us that we need to be negative toward select individuals. Society tells us that we can't be nice to everybody. What happens if you're nice to everybody? Somebody's going to take advantage of you, so you can't be nice to everybody. Okay. That's what society tells us. But we're naturally friendly individuals. We're naturally cooperative. We're naturally constructive. Society, on the other hand, tries to force people into a general mold where these attributes are defined using society's norms, not the individual's needs. So society tells you what religion to follow. Once upon a time, when the Spanish first came over here, my goodness gracious, they just hated everybody because they weren't Catholic. They weren't Christian. So they tried to change everybody, right? Write all this down. Spanish bastards tried to change everything. So the English came over here. They weren't the same as the Spanish. They didn't try to make everybody Catholic. They tried to make everybody Protestant. How are you? Better? Thank you. They tried to make everybody their brand of a Christian. I know, it really gets kind of interesting. So when the federal government decided that they were not going to exterminate all the indigenous people in the United States, what did they do? They gave all the each reservation to a different denomination of Christianity. They wanted to Christianize all the Indians. That's how they were going to civilize everybody. So they were going to send everybody to boarding schools. They were going to Christianize everybody. I don't remember what denomination got this reservation. I don't even know if this reservation was around. This is like in the 1870s. This reservation wasn't even here at that point, was it? Was it?
There was, the first churches out here were the Jesuit and then the Catholic.
Jesuit, the Catholics?
There's the Spanish and then the Mexican governments, and then eventually some of the Spanish missionaries Catholic became Christian Reform.
Okay.
And that's what they were Protestant.
Right, but the federal government, they actually assigned each church to a reservation.
After we came back, we signed a treaty. It was Protestants that
Protestant.
were allowed to come out and open schools up.
You can't just say Protestant, you have to say what kind
It
of.
was Christian Reform.
Christian Reform, okay, so that's the Dutch. Sorry. Interesting people.
And if you keep going, like, that's why there's places like Vanderwagen. They're named after Dutch.
There you go. That's logical. Okay, that makes sense. Now everything is starting to fall into place. Now I understand. For the existentialist, the epitome of societal manipulation is war, where the individual is destroyed functioning for the group, and mechanization, where the individual is trivialized and alienated for the good of the masses. So if you work in a factory, or if you're in the military, they tell you who to shoot at. They tell you who to hate. And you die, potentially you die, you sacrifice yourself for the group. That's what war is all about. But the same thing kind of happens with mechanization, working in a factory. You're trivializing yourself, you're subordinating yourself in order to make a product. Humanists feel that an individual should be supported in reaching their individual potential or to be self-actualized. So the idea is we need to reach our potential. Is this what you're taught in grade school and high school? Reach your potential. You need to go to high school. Or you need to go to college. You need to go get your master's degree. You need to be a doctor. Do they do this with everybody? They pick and choose. Who are they going to be nice to this week? Yeah. Exactly. When I graduated from high school, I had to go to see the counselor. And guess what the counselor told me I needed to do with the rest of my life? Become a college professor. No, they didn't say that. He said that I should join the Army and join the Army for 20 years and then retire. He wanted me to become a soldier. That would be living up to my potential, wouldn't it? Vietnam was going on at the time. That would have been interesting. Okay, self-actualize. A similar concept in existentialism is the idea of making your life meaningful to you by being your authentic self. In other words, you need to figure out who you are, and you need to live up to who you are. You need to be your authentic self. You don't need to act like Michael Jordan, the basketball player, or Tom Brady, the football player. You don't need to, I don't know what Tom Brady does, but whatever Tom Brady does, that's what you don't need to do that. You need to act like yourself. So who are you? That's the trick, is figuring out who you are. You went to high school. When you're in high school, who were you? Well, you were, for one thing, you were a teenager, and your brain wasn't completely mature yet. So when you get into your 20s, now you should be able to figure out who you are. And you need to take that authentic self, and that's who you need to become. I know, this gets really exciting. So that's what I had to do. But unfortunately, I was in my 20s when I was in the military. So I needed to decide who I wanted to be. Did I want to be a soldier, or did I want to be something else? Was being a soldier the person that I should be? The other thing was that I kept moving from place to place. And in Mississippi, they wanted me to act one way, and in Texas, they wanted me to act another way. In Texas, they wanted me to wear these cowboy boots with a cowboy hat. And in Mississippi, they wanted me to hate black people, because white people in Mississippi hate black people, as strange as that may seem. So they were trying to tell me who to be. Then I went out to California, a whole new personality, potentially. But I tried to maintain my authentic self. I tried to be the same person I was when I was living in Indiana and doing all kinds of interesting things. It was fascinating because a lot of people in the military, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but a lot of people in the military, they go to Mississippi, they start acting like people from Mississippi. They go to Texas, they start wearing cowboy boots and cowboy hats. That's not them. They're from Chicago. What in the world are they doing in cowboy boots and a cowboy hat? That's not their authentic self. They need to be who they are. I know, this is really kind of exciting. We need to be who we are. In life, we either live lives of freedom and give meaning to our lives, or we allow society to define us and shrink from our individual responsibilities. We need to make our own decisions. I have a student who's living in Horne. He was, I had him in, when I was teaching at Ashford University. And I graduated with a bachelor's degree, brilliant kid. And he tried to get into graduate school and he didn't make it. They didn't let him in. And he's from Bangladesh. So he had to go back to Bangladesh. You can't stay here forever. He had a student visa and his visa ran out. So he had to go back to Bangladesh. Now he's reapplied to graduate schools, and he has 2 acceptance letters. So he gets to come back to the United States. But when he was in Bangladesh, he said, when I was in the United States, I changed my personality. I'm different. When I first started talking to this kid, he wanted everybody to wear a burqa. I'm telling you, he wanted everybody covered up. He thought the women of Ashford were sluts. Wow, because they didn't wear a lot of clothes, he was terrible. And eventually, of course, that changed. Now he's gone back to Bangladesh, where it's a lot more conservative society, and they're trying to tell him that he needs to marry a Bangla woman, a woman from Bangladesh. He doesn't want to marry one. He says they're weak. They only want one thing. They want to make babies. That's it. They don't want to expand themselves. They just want to, I don't know, be those kinds of people. Anyway, so if he stays in Bangladesh, he's going to shrink away from his own self. He's going to shrink away from his personality. He has changed. He came to the United States. He's changed. Now he's going to come back, and he's hoping that he finds a girlfriend. So if anybody's not married and they're looking for a guy from Bangladesh, he's a real nice guy. He's a real sweet guy. He's a real sweet guy. People who allow society to define them may live empty, inauthentic, dysfunctional lives. If you allow society to define you, you've got to decide who you are. Does all that make sense? It's kind of a problem sometimes. Carl Rogers developed a type of therapy based on humanistic model called client-centered therapy. The therapy seeks to bring out the naturally friendly, cooperative, and constructive person in its clients by giving them something that society in its constant competition may have denied them. Unconditional positive regard. People need to love you, and they need to allow you to be yourself, and that's known as unconditional positive regard. Sometimes parents will tell you who to be, and that's conditional positive regard. I will love you as long as you are smart. I will love you as long as you're tall. I will love you as long as you're athletic. I know. People do this. They do this kind of stuff. And if you've ever watched movies, then sometimes you've seen individuals that were being manipulated by their parents. When I went away to college, I went to an elite school in Indiana. And my parents didn't really care what I did. They just wanted me to not be a bum, I guess. I don't know. You know how parents are. Yeah, They just want you to be happy. But I went to college with a bunch of guys that were pre-med. And the reason they were pre-med is because their parents told them they needed to be doctors. Well, you'll be okay as long as you're a doctor. Most of these guys are dead. They're dead because they were doing something they didn't like. They became doctors and they didn't want to be doctors. I had a friend that had a heart attack. They decided he couldn't practice medicine anymore. So he went to law school. He had lots of money because, well, he's a doctor. He made lots of money. Went to law school. Loved it. Fantastic. He's the prosecuting attorney in his county, and he's wonderful. He's the best prosecuting attorney in the state of Indiana. Loves it. Fantastic. The heart attack that he had, they said he wasn't going to live very much longer. He's been alive for 25 years after his heart attack.
Because he was happy.
Because he's happy. He was not his authentic self as a doctor. He still understands medicine. He likes it better now that he's a lawyer, but he hated it when he was practicing medicine. I mean, some people can do that kind of stuff and some people can't. So you've got to be your authentic self. You've got to figure out who that is. And your parents have to give you the freedom to be who you want to be. I did this with my son, and geez, now he's 48 years old, and he's finally working on a master's degree in mathematics. I should have been meaner with him.
So what if your authentic self doesn't pay the bills?
That's the problem, isn't it? Artists have that problem. You know, I watch PBS sometimes, and they have these artists on Saturday night, and it's like 3 minutes of, I used to be like this, and now I'm like this. Look at this painting. It looks like, it just slapped. And I'm thinking, who buys this? My God. But it's his authentic self, so I guess I don't know. Yeah, you're right, if it doesn't pay the bills. If you're a poet, who buys poetry? But if that's who you are, that's who you gotta be. I guess you can do one thing and then do what you love.
Outside the
Yeah. You go to work and you do this, and then when you go home, you write your poetry or you do your stupid, ugly paintings, whatever. That's a good point. That is a good point. Sometimes you can't make any money doing what you love. Making hats or something. Unconditional positive regard is non-judgmental. What are we talking about? Yeah, okay. Is non-judgmental, good feelings for the individual, something that children don't always get from their parents, but should, of course. The parents should treat them better. They should give them unconditional positive regard. Because parents so often put conditions on their love for their children, good behavior, good grades, athletic prowess, the individual may doubt their worth because of the conditions of worth placed on them. There was a movie about a lady that her father wanted her to be a figure skater and win the Olympic gold medal, and he even built a structure for her to put her medal in. I mean, this is how bad it was. And of course, that was his conditional love for her, had to do with her becoming a figure skater. Well, she wasn't good enough, okay? She wasn't good enough. And she didn't want to do it anyway, but she did it because her father, that's the only way she could get love from her father, was to be a figure skater. So it's The Razor's Edge or something. I can't remember the name of the movie. It's really kind of cool though. She hooks up with a with a hockey player, and he becomes, because he's so strong, he becomes her partner. Yeah, it's kind of a good movie. I can't think of what the name of the movie is. Because of this distorted view of self-worth imposed on them by their parents, dysfunctional people participate in constant self-deceptions. I am not good unless I win at everything. They keep them from becoming self-actualized, reaching and recognizing their authentic potential. So they use these self-deceptions. And of course now we have a mental illness taking place because they're deceiving themselves and they haven't reached their potential, their full potential. Therapists who use Rogers client-centered therapy try to create a supportive climate in which clients feel able to look at themselves honestly and acceptingly. The therapist's job is to display the proper qualities during therapy, unconditional positive regard, accurate empathy. In other words, you're telling them how they really do feel. Rather than lying to them like their parents, like their friends. All of these individuals have been lying to them all this time. And of course, you are showing them accurate empathy, but at the same time, as a therapist, you have to be genuine, and you have to demonstrate genuineness in therapy. You are who you are. By doing this, the client feels accepted by the therapist. In this environment, they begin to value their own emotions, thoughts, and behaviors, and are thus freed from their insecurities. They are insecure because their parents have taught them to be insecure. This is what you really want to do, and this is what I'm telling you to do. So that gives you insecurities. You want to be somebody that you're not, or that you're somebody that you're not never going to be, and it creates insecurities. The first real alternative to psychoanalysis, many therapists have used this therapy as a base, but have moved on to more proactive forms of therapy. So Rogers actually was a psychoanalyst. He was a Freudian. And he realized, wait a minute, this isn't working for everybody. I need to be more humanistic. I need to be more existential. I need to give people what they actually need, rather than me telling them what's wrong with them. They need to tell me what's wrong with them. And that's humanistic existential therapy, or client-centered therapy. I'm actually trained as a client-centered therapist. I'm a Rogerian using Egan's model. That's the way I was trained. So yeah, I understand this stuff a little bit, maybe just a tad. Existential theories in therapy. Existential theorists see people hiding behind common interpretations of the world and thus refusing to recognize responsibility to give meaning to their own lives. The only person that can give meaning to your life is you. It's not me. It's not a therapist. It's you giving meaning to your own life. You need to decide who you are, and who you need to be. And that's the whole point, is you deciding who you want to be. Existentialists see people living inauthentic lives because they give the responsibility for defining themselves to society. You're letting society tell you who you are. You're letting society tell you that you're not Christian enough. You're letting society tell you that you're not rich enough, you'll never be happy unless you buy a Lexus or a Mercedes or something else. I don't know.
Awesome.
Never go to Walmart, because that won't make you happy. You need to only buy things at other stores. I don't know. In existential therapy, people are encouraged to accept responsibility for their lives and their problems. And it's this responsibility. There is a problem with existential therapy. There is a problem with humanistic therapy. You have to take responsibility for yourself. So you can't blame anybody for anything else. So if something happens to you in your life, you have to figure out what you did wrong, because things didn't work out. So it's never the other person's fault. It's always your fault. You have to take responsibility for everything. Now, the problem may be that you married the wrong person, or that you're with the wrong person. But you have to make this determination. You have to see everything as potentially your fault. And of course, I've been married 3 times. I know, Sheldon, it irritates Sheldon. I'm sorry, Sheldon. I made 2 mistakes, okay, Sheldon? I married the wrong person. Okay. I married people that didn't want to be married.
Third time's a charm.
It's working this time. Actually, she told me that she loved me, and I saw her this weekend, and she still loves me. I know. I know. Maybe it's Valentine's Day. I don't know. She decided.
It's conditioning you.
Yes. I started salivating. Yeah, the whole thing took place. Now you're all ready. She told me that she loved me, but she also told me she's not buying me a Valentine's present, so I don't know if that has anything to do with it. And I'm not going to buy her one either. Yeah, that would be me getting one up on her. Okay, why don't we stop right here? We'll pick this up next time. We just finished chapter 3, which is, or 2? Was that 2 or 3?
3.
Was that 3?